My name is Dan Russell, and I, as was pointed out, am Uber Tech Lead for Search Quality and User Happiness. What that means is that I'm the guy who tries to understand how you all are searching on Google. Why is it you put in those funny queries? And what can we best do from Google's perspective to actually make that experience better for you? As a consequence of that, I work a lot with the folks who develop web apps, like, say, the Google search application. And I also work a lot with people who build web apps and the whole user experience in general in Google. And we've got a lot of those. That's kind of what our business is built on, is providing applications that run over the web, over the cloud, and give you your user experience on your phone or on your device. And how can we make that a better experience? So that's the user happiness part of what my job is all about. And it's a great job, because I get to go watch how people actually use their real devices at home or in school or in their workplace. And it's astonishing. It's a really interesting job. So one of the big things that comes out of my observational studies is to watch how people react when we change stuff. And that leads me to the title, which is the UX is constantly shape-shifting. This is one of the things that you probably know as a user, but you might not have thought about it, at least in the ways that I've thought about it. So here's the punchline for the entire talk. Change is constant. Get used to it. It's good. It has been constant during the lifetime of web applications, and it will continue to be constant. The only constant is evolution. So in particular, what this means is that, from my perspective, I see not only that the applications that we are hosting are shifting in their expression, in their user interface, but also in their underlying capability and the range of what's possible. So from the search perspective, it's not just that we change the user interface, but also the underlying data shifts beneath you. Ever tried to go back to a page you got in 404? Has that ever happened to you? Data comes, data goes. It mostly comes, less of it leaves. But on the whole, we live in this incredibly interesting time when data is piling on data on data on data. So it's kind of like to your question, right? How do we deal with all of this? But what we do to deal with it is we give you new tools, new systems, new capabilities. So we're driven, we the business, the industry is driven by a multitude of factors. And let me give you a particular example to kind of illustrate this. So this is the Google Maps interface that you might have used. Does anybody use Google Maps? Probably, yeah, everybody, okay. It works reasonably well. And so this is the interface you might have seen as of 2005, right? Now, it looks very familiar to you, but in truth, every bit of this interface has changed between 2005 until now. That's good news, and it's interesting news. The good news is mostly you didn't notice. This is good, particularly from my experience perspective as a user interface designer. So 2005, that's what it looked like. Now, I want to point out a couple things to you. First off, this data is not Google data. All the roads and maps and lines and ponds and all that stuff, we got that data from somebody else. We licensed that data from them. The advertisements or the links for the hits are on the right-hand side. The controls on the upper left side, and look at the particular pop-up over Round Table Pizza, and they're in Palo Alto. Now I'm going to show you a sort of time lapse over the past few years. That's 2005. And then a year later, I ran the same query, and look, a lot has changed. Okay? The color is the same, but we moved the results over to the left-hand side. We're now giving you more information in those results. Mostly people didn't notice. If anything, this UI change helped people. Because, you know, truthfully, we tend to find stuff like this on the left-hand side. Putting on the right-hand side, well, that was our first cut. You know, we didn't get it quite right. And that's a big part of what's driving our evolutionary pressure. We're constantly tinkering to make the experience better, including making changes that you don't even know about. So, for example, we will change the color of the links on the search results page. We've gone through, I don't know how many hundreds of different colors, most of which you never noticed. Right? We do very subtle changes in, for example, the shading of this particular blue to that particular blue. And it turns out we can see behavioral shifts, even when you can't perceive the difference. So what's happened, what this really tells us is there's a lot of unconscious behavior that we're trying to mediate. we're trying to make that experience better for you. So this is a simple and very straightforward change. Now between 2006 and 2007, see the shift there, we started including the icons or the photograph of the pizza places. We started including user reviews. So you could actually then contribute a review. So now there's a whole bunch more capability happening here in the interface, just on the left-hand side. We now have directions that you can get. So we're constantly adding new capabilities. Now between 2009 and 2010, the map doesn't look much different, but all of a sudden this is our data now. We shifted from a paradigm where we were using other people's license data to a world where we have cars driving out there in the world and we have all our own map data now. Right. So that was a big deal for us. Saved us a ton of money. But we also changed some details about the way the interface works. We now have a blue color scheme. We changed the name of the product. Again, most of you didn't notice that. We also now have an additional ad at the top left for this one for New York Pizza. We introduced that in 2010. For people who need that link, that's a perfect link. Gives us a little bit of extra revenue stream. But basically, we know year to year we're improving the behavior. We know that people can find their pizza places faster. We know that we're not dropping users in their task accomplishment sequence. So all these changes happen rapidly. In between each of these, I'm not showing you the 10, 20, 30 changes that also happen. Now here's the beginning of last year, and then there's the middle, end of last year. Notice the difference there? There's a lot of UI changes that happen between the beginning and the end of the year. Details the way the map is rendered changed. The way the results are rendered on the left-hand side changed. A lot of stuff happens. Key point, change is constant. Okay. So here's the quick summary. Over the past 5 years, 6 years, we've seen a lot of changes. The thing I want to point out to you is to look, example, at the the links on the right-hand side. Here, in the very first year, 2005, we see print, email, and link to this page. A year later, we have those same things, but we added 3 new buttons below that. So you can shift your view from map to satellite hybrid view. You all noticed that when that happened in 2006, right? Okay. Here, a couple years later, we have a bunch of new capabilities. So you see what's happening. We keep adding new stuff, we keep having new data, we keep adding capabilities. This is our prime directive. Make your life better. Make your data more accessible. Make your tasks faster, simpler, more accurate. Now, we don't always get it right. Here, for example, is a version of maps looking at a location you see, San Diego. Now, the thing that sometimes we get wrong is we'll add UI widgets to this interface that people don't actually notice and don't actually use. So as we go through our evolution process, we're looking for ways that make your life better. But did you ever notice that little widget there in the middle of the bar on the left-hand side? A few of you did. You're the 4 people who clicked on that. And I know because I looked at the statistics. The truth is, 99.8% of everybody never saw that and never got used. So we took it out. Here's another one. Anybody click on that in the lower right corner? No, I know you didn't either. It's one of those things where we think it's a good idea at the time. We do a little bit of testing, it seems to work out well. But our test population is, guess what? They're drawn from Silicon Valley. They're all nerds to begin with. So we have to try to figure out how to be better, use a better testing population, more representative of real behavior. So we don't always get this stuff right. Now, I've been showing you the details for maps, but I want to contrast this now with what we do with the search engine results page, with our home product, with a general search. Now, this is the way Google search looked in 2009. Now, one of the raps that Google always gets is, you've been giving me 10 blue links forever. Why don't you, come on, do something new? Truth is, we're doing a lot of new stuff. The good news is you don't notice it. The bad news is you don't notice it. Okay, so this is what it looked like in 2009, but now this is 2011, end of last year. And if you look at those side by side, you can see actually a whole bunch of stuff has changed. It's not perceptible here, especially when it's going through the projector, but the link color is different, the way the snippets are generated is different, a lot has changed. So what this means, I think from a web app's perspective, is that there's an interesting future, right? The future of all this is that changes are happening constantly and happening primarily without notification. I've given you examples about maps in search results page, but this also happens in Google Docs, in spreadsheets, AdSense control panel, everything we push out on the web. Because it's a web app, that means the software engineers can go back and modify things constantly. Now, they try to be slightly organized about that, and they actually have major pushes and minor pushes and all that. And when there's a major revision to the UI, we'll put out a blog post about it. Maybe do a little marketing about that. When there's a new launch of a new capability, we'll let you know about that as well. So the new introduction of a new capability, we'll make some big push to make sure people know about that. But there are reasons we do this. First off, we're responding to competitive pressures. Everybody's got competition, we've got competition. As they do stuff, we have to do stuff, and vice versa. So we live in this interesting ecosystem where the external world changes, and we have to be able to respond to that. So unlike the old paradigm, where you would get a CD every 18 months, and you would install a new version of your, say, word processing app, right? Remember those days? You only had to learn a word processor once, and you were good for 10 years? Unless you use Lotus 123, you know, and those apps that faded away. But generally, if you stayed in the mainstream, you could learn something once and you were inoculated for 10 years. That's no longer true. Stuff appears into the submenus of these online applications in response to things that are going on in the world. There's also another pressure, which is we're trying to make the experience better. So we fix bugs, we move things around in response to what we see in our data. So we very carefully monitor the clicks, the behaviors, the updates, the amount of time you spend actually looking at a page and so on. And we try to make that experience better. Sometimes it's just fixing ordinary bugs, but we're perpetually in this mode of evolving the product to be better. You have to be used to that. We also live in a world right now that seems to be dividing up into an interesting set of spaces, and I'm not sure what the future is here. It used to be, if you would have asked me last year, I would have said, web apps forever. We're going into a world where everything will be on the phone, on the desktop, it will be mobile, it will be mediated through some internet protocols. Well, now we're getting apps, right? The resurgence of apps. Is there an app for that? Do you have an app for whatever? And so what we see is people, the developer community is actually sort of splitting in interesting ways. They're continuing to do web application development, but they're also developing native mode apps because they have certain nice capabilities. They have really great response time, they have no latency, they have access to certain features on the hardware. But at the same time, it doesn't give you this transcendent property that you have a uniform experience between your phone, your desktop, your laptop at home, your tablet in the car. Not that you do that. But we want to have those capabilities, but at the same time, we want this cool new feature so I can play that game in simulated real-time 3D. So it's an interesting world. We have this desktop versus mobile split. We now know, for example, in countries in Asia, where most of the queries are now coming from mobile. Right? So the world in, say, Korea and Japan and so on is really intrinsically mobile. It's mobile first. So that's an interesting other competitive pressure. Think about this. I'm trying to design how many platforms now? I've got N different browsers. I've got N different kinds of mobile devices I have to render to. And now I'm trying to make a consistent user experience across all of that. Do you go to the lowest common denominator, the little tiny mini screen like that? Or do you go for the giant, 99-inch monitor that only a couple of us have? Or the super jock who's got 29 monitors? So it's an interesting complex design space. And the only way I think we're going to be able to understand this is not to create a single uniform experience that runs across everything and looks exactly the same, but actually specializes, but gives you a consistency of experience so that you recognize the Google style or the whatever style. So the user experience of the cloud, I got to tell you, it's changing, right? It's changing. The second order effects are changing, right? Not only because we're having new technologies coming around and we're having faster local processors. Your cell phone processor is a beast compared to the processors of 10 years ago. It has more memory in your pocket than flew on the Apollo missions. I mean, it's an interesting place. We have these new opportunities, though, as your phone becomes increasingly sensor competent, as was just described, right? You've now got this incredible sensor package here in your pocket. It can tell if you're walking or running, if you're going upstairs or downstairs. It can monitor traffic, so how you're moving on the freeway or not. So we've got new idioms developing as well, as people constantly creating new kinds of social networking software or personal data collection stuff. We're having these new possibilities. And so what you're seeing is kind of a genetic recombination of ideas, capabilities, hardware, and underlying technology. You know, I can take my phone and walk outside and take a picture of one of the buildings and figure out what building it is by doing a search. Okay? This is now a query device. I can now inspect my world. Imagine that I had a little laser scanner on there so I could actually do mass spectrophotometry of objects in the world. I say, this isn't a wooden lectern, this is actually polystyrene. And I could do that query by running my phone against it. Right? Imagine that kind of new, interesting world. So we have these pushes for all kinds of reasons. And I think the paramount concern from you as a consumer, as you as a user of the cloud, is that you learn these new ways. The implications are, I think, we all need to pay attention to the possibilities. You could no longer learn a word processor and be good for 10 years. You can no longer understand the structure of data in the library because the library is changing constantly. We also need to develop a set of cloud use skills. So for example, when I click on that button, does it matter if it comes back in a half a second, 100 milliseconds, or is a delay of 20 seconds okay? Well, it depends. How good's your connection? How good's your bandwidth? Once you start to understand that, that's mediating your experience of the cloud. I would argue we also need to develop new kinds of metacognitive skills. What I mean by that is the willingness and the ability to explore, for example, new user interfaces. You can't rely on having seen an interface once and in 2 years having it be the same. There may be new drop-down menus, there may be new capabilities, new things that allow you to do your job much better. If you don't have the metacognitive oomph to be willing to explore that, then you are forever stuck in the experience of 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So I think it's an interesting space for us as consumers and an interesting space for us as technologists. Thanks very much. Any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm interested in the applications for libraries. And we have our physical library, our physical collection, our catalogs electronically. What kind of applications are you working on that would somehow make it available universally? And also, what are the long-term implications for continuing to access that information?
There are a lot of ways I can answer it. One is, do you have the library here have a link resolver?
Yes.
Okay, so that's one way. You know what the link resolver is, right? So you can actually do it if you're inside the Colorado State domain, and you do a Google search, for example, on Scholar, we can point you to all the library resources rather than pointing you to some external resource. So it actually then effectively extends your catalog into the Google experience that you would have if you were looking at Scholar here. So you can look for kinds of tighter integrations like that, so you can actually pull that kind of stuff in. And that's one way to do it. I think there's one of the things I go around telling people is, Google is fantastic. We have meta-cataloged the world in many ways. That doesn't make local data repositories go away. You still have to know that stuff. And although we're making the world flatter in some ways, there are still effective, really wonderful local data repositories that you still have to know about. So to the extent we can start to smooth some of that over, I think we will. But I think it's not going to happen in the next 6 months. This is a battle. This is a war, not a battle. Anybody else?
So can you talk more details about how you detect if there is a need for change in the user interface based on
How do we detect that there's a need for a change in the user interface? So I like what Shradeep just said, which was one of the things about actually tracking people or using personal analytics is that one of the things you can do is start to look for comparisons about your personal performance versus the way the rest of the world works. So for example, one of my studies a while ago showed that 90% of the US population does not know how to do a find for text in a document. Now suppose I had an analytic for that, for your personal behavior. I would see that some number of people are searching for text very, very, very slowly. And so that would be a piece of advice where I could say, look, here's the thing you should know, right? This is what good tutors do, is they see those kinds of changes. So what we do in our analysis is try to follow what people are doing in tasks and see if there's a population distribution. So for example, there's one population that can do this task in, say, 5 minutes, and there's another population that can do this task in an hour. Something wrong there. We need to help these hour people. And that's how we start to detect where there are opportunities for improvement. Okay? So the easy way to do that is basically by looking for those differences in times. We also do things with latent needs, but that's primarily what we're trying to do. We should also open up the floor for questions for both of us. Oh, I have a couple minutes left. Another question?
Another related question. If you realize that you have to make a lot of changes to the interface, you probably can't do that at once, right? Because then the transition will be very sharp. You want them to make the changes gradually so that the user transitions smoothly. So you can talk about the policies regarding that.
Yeah. So the question is, how do we sequence the set of changes? If you need to make a bunch of changes, how do we sequence it so it's graceful? It's a little bit of a black magic right now. What we do is often we'll look at the set of things that need to be changed and then try to put them in, we'll try to just do a linear sort so that, we do this, then that, then that, then that, then we'll migrate people gently. So it's a little bit like herding, right? Another part of the problem, though, for us is that we have very, very, very different populations that use the tools and the interfaces. And trying to design an interface that works, say, in Korea, and one that works equally well in the United States is really hard. So what we end up doing is also trying to figure out how do we differentiate these things as well. So we also have the desktop versus the mobile platform difference. We've got the international differences. So it's hard, I guess, is the bottom line. So there's no particular skill I can teach you other than looking at them all that are sequenced and trying to say which you should do first. Sorry, there's not a better answer, but that's just the way it works. Question?
How do you balance privacy against the things you need to learn about what individual users are doing to detect improvements that are needed?
Right, so you can,
Do you want to be on mic?
These don't work.
Okay, you gotta come up here. Come on.
So this is a case where you can actually anonymize the data. So you can say, so you don't have to associate a name with the user. You could, for example, synthesize the data enough so that enough information is captured without revealing who you are. So for example, it could say things like, well, age is such and such, weight is such and such. These were the conditions that could have impacted and so forth. So you don't have to reveal names, social security numbers, or things like that.
I know you don't have to. The question was, does Google do that?
An excellent answer. There's many aspects to the privacy story, but probably the best one is to build on what you were just saying. So we actually take the velocity movements of Android phones and use that to figure out traffic flow patterns. I don't know that it's your phone, and Google doesn't know that it's your phone. It comes up random digit ID, but it's one ID that's moving, 2 meters per second, right? Or 0 meters per second. So that's an incredibly handy way for us to get sort of the global cloud-based information that we can then surface on our traffic information thing. With respect to other kinds of things like searches and so on, if you're, for example, logged out, you're an IP address somewhere in the cloud, but the data gets swizzled, so I as a researcher can't even get to that data. I can't get to your data either if I knew your IP address. So when the data comes in, it's already encrypted and privatized in many ways. We do privacy enhancing kinds of things, and we have a very intense, and I emphasize intense, process for getting clearance and who can see what kinds of data. So I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty private. Last question, I think. Yes?
You talked about incrementalizers with large changes. What kinds of large changes do you see
As,
happening?
are you asking for product announcements?
You can say.
Yeah. Without getting fired. Yeah. Let's see. I think one thing that is happening, for example, is the mobile stuff. Look for major changes to happen in mobile space because it's a really active area of research right now. We're doing stuff, a lot of other people are doing stuff, and what's fascinating to me is to see how new idioms come up out of the sea of work that's going on and how those get incorporated into our product and into other products, because we're all kind of living in a space where we're trying to create new ways of interacting and create idioms that other people can use. So for example, the swipe gesture currently doesn't mean anything in a Google search. Someday it will. Right? So you can imagine that that's going to be an interesting set of major changes that will come up in the not too distant future. All right, I think we're out of time, right?
We are. So I'd like to thank our speakers.
Thank you.